entière s'est emparée du plus mystérieux et du plus tragique des faits divers de ces dernières années. L'affaire du pain qui rend fou. La paisible petite ville de Pont-Saint-Esprit a été la proie de ce mal inexplicable qui a frappé plus de 200 personnes. Des crises de folie hallucinatoire dues à la présence dans le pain de l'ergotine, le poison des céréales, ont fait plusieurs morts. La vente du pain a été aussitôt interdite.
16th of August, 1951. Madness spreads through the village of Pont-Saint-Esprit in the Gard region. Dozens of villagers have fallen victim to these bouts of madness. The media talk about men terrorized by snakes swirling in their stomachs. A doctor recounts the evening of the 25th of August when dozens of locals were seized by convulsions as a night of the apocalypse. Reports from the victims are terrifying.
Je suis resté exactement 21 jours sans dormir. Absolument impossible de fermer l'œil, malgré tous les calmants et somnifères que le médecin a pu m'administrer. Alors il est évident, quand on reste 21 nuits sans dormir, l'esprit travaille. Et ma jeune fille avait des crises terribles d'hallucination.
In Pont-Saint-Esprit, they called it the cursed bread drama because all of those who fell ill ate bread from the Briand bakery. It was the first time in France that a whole village had gone mad. It made headlines as the press wondered what could have caused this collective hallucination. In Pont-Saint-Esprit, the locals panic and nobody would go near the bread. The hearses quickly arrived in the village. In total, 7 deaths, 300 people poisoned, and around 50 admitted to psychiatric wards.
« 300 personnes intoxiquées. Ah oui, oh là 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 là. Ça me rappelle un triste souvenir, très triste.
Il y a des gens qui étaient un peu... Oui, ils n'étaient plus dans leur assiette, hein, ils savaient plus trop où ils habitaient. Hein. Des gens qui sautaient de leurs fenêtres, là, enfin, bon, bref. Oui.
Je crois bien que c'était le pauvre Puche qui avait dit ça. Bien sûr, il en est mort, hein. Il s'était mis sur le bord de la fenêtre. Il dit, regardez les gars, je suis une libellule. Oui, je crois qu'il a dit libellule, il n'a pas dit hirondelle. Je suis une libellule, je vole.
Ils étaient vraiment fous. Ils voyaient que du feu. Ils voyaient que du feu, que du feu.
As the first victims were buried, the investigators initially thought that it was a return of St. Anthony's fire, a disease that killed many thousands in the Middle Ages, caused by a parasitic ergot fungus that attacks cereals. The baker was accused of poisoning, followed by the miller. Arrested and incarcerated, they were released several months later. They say that their confessions were made under duress and, above all, that the evidence proved their innocence. It was then thought to be water poisoning, mercury, fertilizers, or a nearby gas factory. But the evidence disproved these theories one by one. Since then, in Pont-Saint-Esprit, more far-fetched theories have surfaced.
C'était la guerre froide à l'époque. Hein. Les coups bas, il devait y en avoir. Hein. Entre l'Amérique et la Russie, je pense que l'URSS.
Non, la sorcellerie, moi je pense pas. Non, non, non.
Le coup du sac de farine posé sur un sac d'engrais. Ça aurait très bien pu être arrivé, ça.
Il y avait un commis là. Et c'était quelqu'un qui n'était pas trop... Il avait fait un pont et de partout, un peu de... Moi, qui le connaissais bien, j'ai toujours pensé que ça pouvait être que de lui.
Le produit a été mis chez le boulanger. Je dis non, c'est pas le boulanger qui l'a mis. Chez le boulanger, il faut que quelqu'un l'ait mis. Ah, il faudrait savoir qui. Donc c'est pas lui, c'est quelqu'un d'autre. Quelque chose qui ne va pas. Ça, c'est pas clair. Pas du tout.
Nothing is clear, and for decades, the incident had gone unexplained. But against all expectations, 60 years later, a new theory is proposed, not from France, but from the United States. An American researcher in the Secret Services, Hank Albarelli, is investigating the suspicious death of a biochemist from the CIA, Frank Olson. A specialist in chemical weapons, he carried out experiments with hard drugs like LSD. He also spent a few months in France before the Pont Saint-Esprit incident. Afterwards, he kept sinking into depression, telling his wife that he'd made a terrible mistake. Hank Albarelli then made the link to the Pont Saint-Esprit incident. Could it have been the CIA and the American Army spraying LSD onto the bread?
I have no doubt at all that Pont Saint-Esprit was a U.S. Army covert experiment. Initially, I had doubts, and I think initially my doubts were motivated by wishful thinking on my part, where I didn't want it to be an experiment. It was hard to fathom the government doing that. Although at the same time, there were a number of research tracks that were being conducted for the book at the same time. So my being naive about what the government and the U.S. Army was capable of doing was the threshold for that was dwindling.
Is it possible that the Americans drugged an entire village in an allied country, causing, no doubt accidentally, the deaths of 7 people? Improbable. However, to understand what happened in Pont Saint-Esprit, we need to look back to the end of the Second World War, when the scale of atrocities committed by the Nazis in the camps was revealed. Most notably, the horrific experiments carried out on thousands of prisoners by chemists or doctors. Men lacerated, poisoned, burnt alive, exposed to radiation. The Allies hunted the war criminals from Hitler's regime. In 1946, in Nuremberg, the doctors were put on trial. 22 men and 1 woman who experimented on human beings transformed into lab rats stand accused. The trial set a precedent. 7 of the accused were sentenced to death, 11 given prison sentences, and 5 were acquitted.
Guilty or not guilty?
As a result, the Americans drafted the Nuremberg Code, a model which sets strict rules for experimenting on humans. Notably, it states, the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. The experiment must be designed to avoid all unnecessary suffering, physical and mental harm. With the Nuremberg trial barely over, the winners remained cynical. The American Secret Services launched Operation Paperclip. Nearly 1,500 German scientists, including war criminals, were expatriated to America. They were offered a new life in exchange for their knowledge and cooperation.
It was a very serious game of propaganda that we were playing. It was almost a show trial. We're putting the Nazis on trial, but in fact, behind the curtain, we're doing some very nasty things ourselves to basically incarcerated people, poor people, individuals who at the time were called feeble-minded and locked up in institutions. And if you were in one of those institutions, whether you were indigent or an unwed mother or had some sort of mental incapacity, there's a good chance that you may have been incorporated in some sort of medical study, possibly for the government or not, where you would have been used and abused.
Assisted by the German scientists, the Americans began pursuing their goal of creating the ultimate weapon. And everything was permitted in the name of the Cold War. On the one side was the army, whose priority was to win the nuclear arms race. In order to test the effects of radiation on a large scale, they used their own soldiers, who were obedient and disciplined. From 1946 to 1962, somewhere between 250,000 and 500,000 men were exposed to radiation on Bikini Atoll or in the Nevada desert. They were exposed with no protection, unaware of the risks involved. And afterwards, the irradiated particles were brushed off with a broom. These images served as propaganda for an army wanting to show off its technological prowess.
How about radiation? Do you think there's much danger from radiation?
Well, radiation is the least of the worries that the men are thinking about.
I think most people thought that radiation was the greatest danger, didn't they? Where did they learn different?
We were, prior to our instructions here. We received a very thorough briefing before we even came in this close to contact with it.
On the other side was the CIA, which was extremely interested in psychological manipulation. Their goal was to create an infallible truth serum, to wipe memories, turn humans into robots, and program them to kill. Conveniently, in 1948, a researcher at Sandoz Laboratories, Albert Hofmann, discovered a molecule that electrified the secret agency, lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. It is derived from the same rye fungus long held responsible for the incident at Pont Saint-Esprit. It was believed that the hallucinogenic properties of this drug were key to psychological manipulation. Fearing that the Russians would get their hands on Sandoz's samples, the Americans bought all of their stock.